And we are live with yet another episode of the MMA Prospectus. I'm Zane Simon, joined once again by Tom Grant to talk all things in the world of developmental MMA, fighters on the rise, the sport as a whole, not focusing on the big names, not focusing on the big fights, unless they happen to include somebody really young and promising. And, this week we're looking at UFC 201, Invicta 18, and World Series of Fighting 32. Take a quick peek back at UFC on Fox last week. Mostly, though, we'll probably start out looking back at last week's Bellator event, which featured hot prospect Darrion Caldwell taking the first big loss of his career. So, Tom, thanks for joining me. And before we dive into what we're going to talk about this week, what are your thoughts about last week's fights?
Well, the Darrion Caldwell fight was pretty excellent. And I think that one, again, like we say it a lot, seems to be like the prototypical submission loss for a prospect. A little like not so much like he faced a big aggressive grappler and got overwhelmed sort of thing. This was more of Darrion Caldwell was beating that ass and then fell into a guillotine at the very start of round 3. And the guillotine is just one of those wild card submissions that I think Firas Zahabi put it best, that basically if you took a talented, athletic, like white belt, blue belt, and had them go against the black belt in grappling and you started them on the feet like 100 times, the inexperienced guy might catch the black belt 2 to 3 times out of 100, and probably all of them would be guillotines. Because if you get it right and you got a nice strong squeeze, it really doesn't matter who you are when you're on the wrong end of it.
Yeah, and I think it's also just one of those things where, if you're like Caldwell and you're a great prospect, still reasonably inexperienced in the sport, and you're only fighting experienced, difficult competition. You're fighting Joe Warren, you're fighting Joe Timenglow, you're fighting Rafael Silva, then there's a very good chance that at some point you're going to get tapped. Like, experienced dudes in this sport, most of them have a decent grappling game, especially if they're generally winning. Like, it's not like 50-50, but Timenglow is like 20-8 or something like that. Most of them have a decent sub game, and inexperienced guys, especially aggressive ones who are willing to press their game, that's where they leave openings. They leave openings in their grappling games. And Caldwell, I watched that fight, and Caldwell was totally positionally dominant for 2 solid rounds and then gets tapped out in 10 seconds in round 3. It's not a badly indicative performance for him. It's just probably one of those, hopefully it's a slight wake-up call that a lot of prospects get, of like, you need to actually kind of check yourself a little and make sure that if you're winning a fight, you don't just throw it away.
Yeah, I think people underestimate how good of a grappler you need to be as aggressive as a lot of like the top guys are against other good grapplers. And it's one of the reasons why we see like a lot of guys who maybe aren't the best like technical grapplers will go very passive on top at times and play more of that, I'm going to stay busy enough so I don't get stood up, versus like actively looking to pass guard, actively looking to go for attacks. Because when you do that, you open yourself up to counters, and it takes a while to get good enough to be able to do that against other highly skilled grapplers. And so Darrion Caldwell, hopefully he keeps working on his game, learns to maybe spot his aggression a little bit more, because for a while, like, Caldwell wasn't the most aggressive mat grappler. He kind of would was a little bit more of like explosive bursts on the ground, and it was more about he'd pile up some damage. And then his last 2 fights we talked about, we started seeing him play a much more assertive, aggressive submission game, and now this might be the other end of that, where like, all right, so you do that, so now you're going to have to come to terms with the fact that you're going to make mistakes and get yourself into trouble, and now you just have to be able to like minimize those mistakes and work your way out of them.
Yeah, and like, to perfectly illustrate this point from this last weekend, we saw like If you saw that Darren Elkins Godofredo Pepe fight, like Pepe is as aggressive a grappler as you get in MMA, essentially. Mm-hmm. And he's a decent one. Like, he's a solid, good grappler for how aggressive he is. Not amazing, but really solid, hyper aggressive, good athlete. And you get into that like top 15 range and you meet a guy like Darren Elkins, and Elkins just shut it down. Like, that is, you know, for guys who have high level grappling success in the UFC, who get, you know, a flying triangle on Andre Fili, you meet a certain level of fighter and they'll just, like, that aggressive grappling game really can be, you know, that's why we tend to see, like, not only is it something that can be countered and creates mistakes, and that, like, but it shows how good you have to be at it to make it work at a high level, that mm-hmm. even guys who found some success with it, even guys who are ultra aggressive with it, they'll just get shut down sometimes.
Yeah, and it is something I've heard that, especially when you're dealing with nogi, the defender tends to have the priority in when it comes to submission, like submissions happening and grappling in nogi, because there are fewer attacks. And it's just harder to control your opponent when there's no fabric friction, when there's a lot of sweat. It becomes a little bit more difficult, and just that much more difficult, where you can have a fighter who comes in, and especially Pepe, he's aggressive, but he's not always intelligently aggressive.
Yeah.
And if he spotted his offense just a little bit better, it would likely up his finish rate. But like against a guy like Darren Elkins, it's really tough, because that's a guy who bases his game around grinding you into dust.
So on the flip side of that too, or on the same side of that, we then had Kamaru Usman, who put on a very very similar to Darian Caldwell in that Joe Time and Glow fight, put on a very dominant wrestle grappling performance. And unlike Caldwell, wasn't quite as positionally aggressive and didn't make the mistakes.
Yeah, and it was impressive in the sense that Muntasiri has shown in the past.
Usman?
Oh, sorry. I
Kovalev?
Jumped to the wrong fight. No, Usman, yeah, the Usman fight to me was of the prospect performances of the weekend, to me the most impressive, because we kind of expected him to maybe struggle a little bit with Yakovlev, and he just walked right through him. I don't think Yakovlev was ready for just how strong Kamaru Usman was in the clinch. And Usman made it through the fight without like really getting into any serious trouble, aside from the time he basically stepped himself into a heel hook and then like was trapped against the cage. But Yakovlev wasn't able to like move Usman enough to get the heel exposed to really get the leverage for it. But if he had, Usman would have been in trouble because he was like pinned against the cage. But that was it. I mean, for the most part, it was one-way traffic, and it wasn't the most exciting fight, especially on a night where just generally there wasn't a lot of like really high-paced action fights on this card. Mm-hmm. So this fight got panned a little bit, but it was just a really strong performance for Usman.
Yeah, it's the kind of strong, basic win that it doesn't get fans excited about a prospect, but if you're scouting, it gets you a bit excited. It makes me happy about a prospect, because it's just a very like, okay, I've got a slightly dangerous opponent in there. You keep winning in the UFC. Like, I'm going to do what I need to do to make sure I win this fight and move forward, and not necessarily just go out there and make a bad mistake. You know, it's sort of like, you know, it's not striking, so it's not nearly as exciting, but it's kind of like what we've seen from like, it's kind of like Max Holloway versus Jeremy Stevens on a much lesser plane, where Holloway, it's like, okay, I've got a really big puncher in front of me who really needs me to engage. I'm just going to sit on the outside and pick him apart for 3 rounds and take a clear decision. Doesn't get anybody excited at all. But it shows you that a prospect can win a fight that they need to win and move on.
Yeah.
So, it's the kind of thing we have not seen from a guy like Warley Alves.
Yeah.
He's either blowing people out of the water in an instant, or he's putting himself in extreme danger over the course of 3 rounds, and even most recently losing. Otherwise, yeah, Alex Oliveira, talking about that Muntasri fight, Alex Oliveira also looked really, really dominant and good over James Muntasri. I kind of figured that was a really good stylistic match for him, but it's good to see a fighter in a great stylistic match just absolutely run over their opponent.
Yeah, to me the most like the part that shined through for Oliveira, like in a matchup that I thought favored him, was that Muntasri has shown really strong cage skills in the past, and he just was not able to really get off the cage with any consistency against Oliveira. Again, not the most exciting fight, but a good fight for Oliveira.
Yep. And then Francis Ngannou also got a layup win in a fight that everybody picked to be a layup. It was even more of a layup than one might have predicted, in that he didn't actually really have to do any damage to win it.
Yeah, actually, in a shocker, when we were coming out to this fight, I knew that one of my jiu-jitsu coaches was like backstage for the fights, because he trains like an agent of like several of the fighters, but apparently he was also in the corner of I'm forgetting his name. Yeah, he was in the corner, that's a rough corner to be in, because he got fed to Ngannou, and Ngannou did everything right except at the end when he like didn't call anybody out. They basically like begged him to call out like a heavyweight, and
I would say in his defense, I actually think that that's a perfect thing for him to do right now, because I saw like at least one person online who was like, so what do you think they're going to do for Ngannou's next fight? Feed him another can or put him in against a real like gatekeeper like Travis Brown? And it's like, no, don't do that. This dude has been fighting for like 2 years, and Travis Brown is a fringe top 5 fighter.
Yeah, no, I agree with you that we don't want to run him up there too fast.
Just let him fight some other no-name dude on the bottom of the card, get more cage time, get more experience. And, because he's a big, exciting prospect, people are already starting to be like, so when's this dude going to be fighting for a belt? We want to see that right now.
It's kind of, it is one of those things. People go from 0 to 60 on someone like that really fast.
Yep. And at heavyweight, where there's normally almost no learning curve, there's a real danger of him just getting pushed into a fight against somebody like, I don't know, like Mark Hunt or something, and suddenly, or, Josh Barnett, and suddenly you're like, oh, okay, well, we just got to see Francis Ngannou get tapped out by somebody who's got 20 years more experience than him.
Yeah.
That was really, we get the Felice Herrig versus Kylan Curran fight, where people were actually picking Curran in this, and it's like, this woman is 4-2, and none of her wins have any quality to them at all, really. And you're putting her in there against Felice Herrig, who, while people don't like her, is a really solid gatekeeper to the top 15 in that division. And Herrig just chokes her out in an instant. It's like, great. What did Kylan Curran get out of that fight? Yeah.
No, I agree. It's a rough position with heavyweight, especially since it's like there's such a drop off. I mean, like, the drop from like the regular heavyweight division to like that upper portion is really, really steep.
Yeah, well, it's a line too of like, your top 15, your edge of the top 15 is Roy Nelson right now, essentially. And Ruslan Magomedov. And, Nelson especially, like, if you're looking at him as like the borderlines of the top 15, he's impossible to hurt. And while he's not as dangerous as he used to be, he's still a big power puncher. And he's showing some of the takedowns in wrestling that were there early in his career, some of the grappling that was there early in his career. And then, like, the next step down are guys like Gabriel Gonzaga and Bigfoot Silva, who are talented in stages and very hurtable.
Mm-hmm.
And you're drawing this line of like all the dudes that are almost impossible to hurt are the top 15. And then the next step down is a few veterans that are easy to hurt and very experienced. And then you're just looking at guys that are, nobody knows them. Guys like Walt Harris or Daniel Omalanchik who are scrubbing out a few wins that nobody cares about. And it's so easy for a guy like Ngannou to go from beating, somebody like Bojan Mihailovic to suddenly fighting somebody like,
Travis Brown.
Yeah, Travis Brown. And it's just like that's not a good idea. That's not how the sport should work. You should not be fighting the absolute worst and then going up to somebody that is a long proven track record against the best.
Yeah.
So hopefully that can slow down. Otherwise, in the same vein, we're going to turn now to this UFC 201 card and very directly Rose Namajunas, who came up with a series of good performances against, she beat Emily Kagan and Kathina Catron, and then on tough, she beat Alex Chambers and Joan Calderwood and Randa Marcos, all on tough.
Mm-hmm.
And then she fought championship level fighter Carla Esparza, and that was the jump she had to make. She fought a bunch of okay prospects and middling journeywoman fighters, if you want to say, and or the top as a championship caliber fighter, and very badly. But it's that whole price of hype that she's now had to rebuild from and has been slowly rebuilding from ever since.
Yeah, and it wasn't necessarily a terrible thing for her to lose that fight, as she's gone back and really she's reworked her game a little bit. She still has that high flying, flashy offense aspect to it, but she now has added a bedrock fundamental game, very in the line of what we talk about with Yair Rodriguez and things like that, where she started at some of the crazy stuff and has now been adding some of the more fundamentals to her game. And it's been coming together recently where she, the Tisha Torres fight obviously being kind of a milestone for her because she lost to Tisha Torres rather convincingly in 2013. And then 3 years later came out and looked like a different fighter against her. And now is getting in there with, again, another fighter who, in Carolina, who is looking like she's going to be, if not a championship contender, a top-ranked fighter for a while.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting test for me, to me, actually, for Namajunas, because I'm not entirely her latest win over Tisha Torres was not half as convincing. It was good, it was a solidly competitive fight, and she did well. Both women have improved a lot, but it was not half as convincing as her win over Paige Van Zandt, where she just dominated Van Zandt top to bottom. And this fight that she's got coming up with Karolina Kowalkiewicz is sort of an interesting midpoint. It's an interesting one to me because Van Zandt is that sort of cusp of the top 10 kind of fighter who's a great athlete, really powerful physical presence, and doesn't have much of the technical game to go with that.
Mm-hmm.
And Kowalkiewicz is much more all the technical game and not so much the dominating athlete.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Torres fight, we saw somebody who has a game, not the same, but somewhat similar, a high, very good athlete, but a high output striking game, and she gave Namajunas a lot of trouble regularly. She hurt her a couple of times. Like, she stunned Namajunas a few times, and she was able to put hands on her, and it would make it a very tough fight. And I'm interested to see, it's like, is the problem going to be the volume kickboxing, or does it have to be that combination of athleticism and volume kickboxing? Because if Namajunas can go out there and just be the better athlete, the more powerful athlete, she could probably run over Kowalkiewicz. And if it's a case purely of like this volume striking is going to give her trouble, then Kowalkiewicz could give her problems, a lot of the same problems that Torres did, and in a very close fight that Torres could have won. So I'm very interested to see this fight with Namajunas and see if she's taken more steps forward on her basic tools of striking, because while those looked much better against Paige Van Zandt, it's obviously something that she's got development work to do there.
Yeah. And on the other end of the cage from her, I mean, will be Carolina, who looks like she's developing into a very good fighter, and she already plays a very and I think before the show you termed it like she has the perfect round winning style. She is a high volume outside kickboxer with good cardio, and has really, she in her last fight really kind of showed a growth in her game, because she looked much more comfortable in the clinch and started like throwing these nice little short elbows in the clinch that really against Heather Clark, that really kind of led to her being able to make space more effectively and break away from her opponents. Like, the biggest thing I see with her right now is that she's still working out how to make her like striking the most effective, because she seems to like to come forward with it, but she tends to come forward in a straight line and is a little stiff defensively, and then she runs into level changes like consistently. And she's a decent grappler. She's not a bad grappler. She uses the cage really well. But against Rose Namajunas, if Rose gets her down, I'm not going to be surprised at all if Rose takes off a piece of her.
Yeah, I do think, like, I think that this is sort of why I'm hesitant on Kowalkiewicz as a future. She could be a title contender just because the division's so small, and because she's built a narrative of, I want to have this Poland versus Poland matchup and take on Joanna. And she's doing a good job marketing that. But I'm otherwise a little skeptical of her being like a long-term top 5 fighter, just because she's so, she hasn't shown a lot in the way of knockout power, and she is defensively very stiff. And then just her sort of linear in and out striking style. Like, there are a lot of points in her game that, as not the world's most amazing explosive athlete, I feel like other fighters could take advantage of. The big thing she has on her side is really good hand speed and cardio to go with it, so that late in fights that especially shows up, where she's, even if it's relatively early in fights, you'll see like towards the end of as the fight goes on towards the end, suddenly the fact that she's still throwing 3 or 4 punch combinations with just as much speed as she was is a major turning point against opponents as they start to get tired.
What else do we have going on this card?
We got Justin Scoggins is actually on this card, somebody we've overlooked a little in our prep. He's fighting Ian McCall in very much a crossroads fight for Ian McCall, and what could be a crossroads fight for Scoggins, because McCall has been, I don't know if you saw some of the recent interviews he's done, but he has just been totally plagued by injuries, even to the point that he's claiming that, now for a long time, and still one of his arms is just not all that functional, kind of dead nerves and shooting pain, and just, he can still club people with it, but it's not a
usable arm. Yeah, well, and then coming in against Scoggins, who is coming off of a fantastic fight against Ray Borg, just looked absolutely outstanding. This could be this could be the big name win for Scoggins that gets him over and gets him into like the top end of the flyweight division.
Yeah, it especially could be that because unlike some of his past opponents, Moraga, who's obviously a very good opportunist and was able to submit him, and Dustin Ortiz, who's just kind of a tough, consistent wrestle boxer, McCall, he's both elite and he's been very breakable from his game. He has the ability to be panicked in fights. Like we saw in his Lineker fight, he was doing pretty well, and then he almost got submitted by Lineker, and everything after that was Lineker just beating him.
Yeah.
Pretty mercilessly. And in the past, otherwise, he's gotten tagged a little bit, and he's just immediately thrown his technical game out the window to get into a firefight that he loses. So it's one of those things where I look at McCall to probably come out and do really well against Scoggins early, and then it'll be a question of how well does McCall hold together, because Scoggins has been putting a lot of polish on his game. His wrestling has looked great. He's still a very fun, flashy striker. Mm-hmm. And if McCall does start to kind of shut down, I expect Scoggins to be right there to take advantage.
Yeah.
Now we've got Nikita Krylov, one of the two champions in waiting, the other, of course, being Ilir Latifi. But light heavyweight superstar Nikita Krylov, Nikki Thrills, is fighting.
Does Superstar even cover the appeal he has to the masses?
No, it's really more like Galactic Overlord, but still
with like a significant amount of like sex appeal thrown in there also.
That's right. Yeah. But he's humble, so I call him a superstar because I know that he would be, that humility would really embarrass. He would be embarrassed to. I can't help but be really excited though about him fighting Ed Herman. That is a awesome fight. I am super excited about because Krylov he fights at a pace that almost no other heavyweight is willing to fight at. Mm-hmm. And with a wild abandon and aggression that no other light heavyweight is willing to match.
Yeah.
And it'll get him more losses. He's had losses before. But Ed Herman looked great knocking out Tim Boetsch last time. And he has actually put more aggression and kind of put more skill in his game. His clinch game looked really good in that fight. But I don't know. Ed Herman's kind of slow, and I'm really excited to see Nikki Thrills try to run over him.
I think this is a winnable fight for Krylov, as Herman is on like clearly the back end of his career. But I think this is going to be a really tough fight for Krylov. I don't think this is an easy win. For the most part, Krylov's wins have come against guys who are kind of on the bottom end of whatever division he's fighting in. And they tend to come against guys who make big mistakes. Even while Krylov is making like big mistakes, and he just is the better athlete and the more aggressive athlete, and ends up being able to pull it out. Where I think he's the better athlete than Ed Herman at this point, because Herman is pushing. He's at 35, so he's in his mid-30s.
And Herman's always been just slow. Like athleticism has never been Herman's watchword.
But he's got a deep well of technical knowledge. He's not gonna make or at least I don't expect him to make a big glaring mistake in his fight and just like give his back to Krylov. Now, the one thing I'll say is like it's even considering the fact that Ed Herman fought at middleweight for part of his career, and we're talking about Nikita Krylov fighting at like heavyweight for parts of his career. I don't expect the size differential to be all that big in this fight. So it's possible fighting against the guy who fought at heavyweight that Herman doesn't look as slow as he normally does. I think this fight, it's a dangerous fight for Krylov, which he could lose, he could win, but if he does win, I expect it to be tougher than people expect it to be, possibly. I don't know.
I don't expect Herman to panic in the same way that guys like Marcos Rogerio de Lima and Stanislav Nedkov and Cody Donovan would have panicked.
Yes, yeah, I think that's fair to say.
And that's a lot of that is how, like, that's kind of the question with Nikita Krylov fights is how well can his opponent keep their shit together? Because if they can keep their shit together, they could probably ride him out and like stay safe and make it to round 2, make it to round 3, where he's just going to be gassed as hell.
I mean, like, if you make him do something besides like aggressively strike with you, if you make him wrestle, if you make Krylov grapple long enough, he makes big mistakes.
Oh yeah.
And it's been a little while since he's had to pay for one of those big mistakes, but he's still making them. And I don't know if Ed Herman is going to make him pay, but Herman has a sneaky good submission game. So I wouldn't be shocked if like we just find ourselves like in one of those like, wait, what's Krylov doing? Oh God, like that's Herman just finished him.
Side of this year is that the guys that Herman has beat lately, a lot of them are not quite like they're not hyper aggressive, just guys who are going to come after you with abandon.
Yeah, no, I think that's I expect Krylov to win this fight, but I expect it to be a tough win.
Because the guys that have just come out and like tried to bulldoze Ed Herman recently, Derek Brunson, Jacare, they've been successful. Obviously, Brunson and Jacare both have much deeper technical games than Krylov, but there is a chance that like a good athlete that just goes out and tries to put it on him in the first minute might be successful doing it.
Well, I mean, part of Herman's thing, and like we've seen it throughout his career, because he's been submitted by like Jacare and Maya and Jason McDonald. If he gets into a grappling exchange with you, he's down to grapple. Like he is not like, oh, I got to stick to my game plan against Jacare Sousa and try to get up and strike with this guy. He's like, no, I'm on the mat with Jacare Sousa. F it, I'm gonna grapple with this guy and see what happens.
Yep.
That's a fight I'm interested in. I think it can end up being a fun fight because it's a Nicky Thrills fight. And I think it's a not a 50-50 fight, but it's really close. It's like a 55-45 fight in my eyes.
Yeah, and I mean, even when we saw him in the Trevor Smith fight, which was like, oh, Trevor Smith is here to throw bombs, I'll throw bombs too. And that was a split, he won that fight, Herman did, but it was a split decision. Like it was a close, ugly, sloppy brawl.
Yeah.
And so, Herman has that willingness to get into that kind of fight, and that kind of fight is where Nicky Thrills does all his best work.
Yep.
So it'll be interesting. It's a fight I'm looking forward to. I love watching Nicky Thrills win despite the odds and just keep playing.
Oh, he's absolutely a fun fighter, and it took me a while to come around to that, but I'm there. He's a fun fighter, and he doesn't have to be an everything title challenger. He's just enjoyable to watch fight.
Otherwise, further down at the bottom of the card, we've got a prospect, a weird prospect in every way, which is Freddie Serrano.
Yeah, former Colombian Olympic wrestler back in 2000.
Colombian Olympic wrestler, a bronze medalist at the Pan American Freestyle Games, a 36-year-old flyweight. And flyweight is the kind of division where you don't, like, most guys can't really afford to be very old because it's all speed-based.
But holy shit, is Serrano a great athlete.
Yep.
I mean, truly, like, Olympic, we talk about Olympians and Olympic athletes. Like, he is an Olympic level, like, plus athlete type, even in his mid to late 30s. And we just haven't seen very much of him in MMA at this point. His fights have all been pretty quick, all 3 of them. And his debut is, like, the longest fight that we've had, where he got partway into the 3rd round before he absolutely destroyed Bentley Seiler. And he seems to have a nice feel for like when to hit people. Like just in really quick transitional moments in the clinch, he's throwing knees, he's throwing kicks. He also doesn't seem to have a good sense of when the similar strikes are coming back in his direction. But man, is he quick on getting takedowns. And obviously his last fight he won via takedown because he dislocated his opponent's elbow on a slam. But he's just a fighter that I would need to see more of to get like a real read on his potential inside of MMA.
Yeah, I'm interested in this Benoit fight that he's got. He was supposed to fight Ray Borg, which would have just been
Madness.
weird. Like he probably would have just got subbed.
Yes, but in a crazy entertaining way.
In a crazy entertaining way. But this Benoit fight is much more of a match because Benoit is not like he's not really a prospect at this point. Even though he's only 26, he started back in 2009. He's been fighting consistently since then, and I more or less expect him to be the fighter he is now for the future.
Yeah, well, he on top of that, he's coming off a fight that he looked terrible. And mostly Benoit's like claim to fame is that he beat Sergio Pettis at this point. But like his UFC fights, he's not looked good in 2 of them.
Yeah, and the thing for him, it really is that he's a really fun power Muay Thai brawler.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's got this power Muay Thai striking game combined with just power punching and boxing. Very kind of throw caution to the wind, let your hands go. Not a deep technical combination game, really. And against Freddie Serrano, that could let him be like that could let Freddie Serrano land a couple shots, but it also means he could hit Serrano really hard. As you say, I mean, Serrano's not great at judging when things are coming back at him.
Yep.
But it's also a great place.
Damn it.
Serrano to show off isn't all that great at defending takedowns.
Mm-hmm.
So this could be like it's a entertaining and difficult but winnable fight for Serrano in that he's got somebody in there who really has a great puncher's chance of just knocking him out, but somebody who also has the stylistic flaws for him to try and get a win. Like it's a big step forward from fighting the low end of the athletic division, which of like Yao Jikui and Bentley Seiler. He's now fighting a very good athlete with big stylistic flaws.
Yeah, no, it should be a fun fight. Looking forward to it. Who else on this card? Michael Graves is interesting.
Yeah,
outstanding.
He's a good athlete and he's tough and he's aggressive, but most of his game is not. He's just really aggressive and really tough and a decent athlete.
Yeah, so, he's got an interesting. It's an interesting piece of matchmaking, putting him against. Oh God, what's his name?
Bojan Velickovic.
Yeah, Serbian Steel.
It should make for a really fun back and forth sloppy fight. Velickovic is one of those dudes who's it seems like he's gotten better training later as his career's gone on, but he's really just this sort of very generic, well-rounded but not great anywhere fighter. Not a great wrestler, not a great grappler, not a great striker. Big, powerful, and Graves is tough and hyper aggressive and a decent wrestler. Good enough to beat Randy Brown, who's a very good athletic prospect. So it should make for a fun, sloppy.
Yeah. Man. Your band
otherwise,
me today, Zane.
Cesar Aramendia, Hector Sandoval. A lot of guys that don't really care that much about. We should turn our attention over to
eaten by Hilson. Hector Sandoval most likely is going to get eaten by Wilson Hayes.
Yeah, well, yeah. I actually like that they got Hector Sandoval. I think he's a good athlete, and I think he's a fun puncher. But he's a 5'2" flyweight whose wrestle grappling game is probably, I don't know, it's going to be that functional in the UFC. And at that point, he's just going to kind of have to rely on being the better boxer in the cage. So to me, Sandoval's biggest issue is that he likes to wrestle against the cage and take guys down against the cage and then work on them
against the cage, which in the UFC is just a recipe for needing to be a rinse and repeat wrestler because guys are just going to pop right back up using the cage. So,
well, and flyweight is not a division where pure wrestlers tend to thrive. Not many people can be held down very easily. But I want to move on because it's not important, and we've got other better fighters to focus on. I want to get over to World Series of Fighting 32 and talk Phil Hawes because it's hard not to be super excited about Phil Hawes.
Yeah, well, Phil Hawes is finally getting back into action after he fought in June. I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, he's already had one fight for the World Series of Fighting. He's staying active immediately after his bad tough run.
Yeah, his bad tough run, and then it basically led to 2 years of inactivity on the professionally on the pro scene. And wasn't it like he lost the fight to get into the house, didn't he?
I'm not sure.
I don't remember. But yeah, it was not a good showing on tough for him. He's getting the quick turnaround. He's getting a decently tough fight in Lewis Taylor, which is going to be a nice test for him. I like the matchmaking. I like that he's getting back in there. Hawes is probably at the point where he wants to be active and fight like at least twice a year, if not 3 times a year.
Yeah, he lost his intro fight. He lost the fight to get into the house against the eventual winner, Andrew Sanchez.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where, yeah, it sucks. Like, it wasn't a good performance on tough, but in retrospect, you lost to the guy that won the show. I mean, that's not... Sanchez is obviously at a point where everything just is clicking for him right now.
Yeah. So... I'm looking forward to seeing Phil Hawes get back in there.
Time, right place. He's got a real tough fight ahead in Lewis Taylor, those goofs who started late, already 37, and who's never quite put together a complete enough MMA game to maybe be a competitor at the highest level.
Mm-hmm.
But he's a very experienced vet. He tends to win a lot, good submission artist, and it should make a very interesting, tough fight for Hawes, like a real test. One of those that could easily end in the prospect submission loss.
Yeah. And then on top of that, we have Hakeem Dawodu fighting, who's like one of the best prospects in all of MMA.
Yep.
Coming off a big win.
No, he's coming off a draw to the guy he's facing.
He's coming off the draw. Oh yeah, no, I'm thinking of like 2 fights ago, because the Magomedov fight was outstanding, and for some reason I thought he had some fights in between then and now.
They've given him a stylistic poison pill to solve as a top prospect, and they said, here is a Dagestani wrestler for you. Canadian Muay Thai striker. What can you do with it?
Not just a Dagestani wrestler, but Magomed is a mat beast. Just really, really fluid. Incredibly fluid positional grappler on the mat. Just like he very much he fights on the mat like a jiu-jitsu fighter. Like he likes to pass and move to dominant position and then look to submit like an old school jiu-jitsu guy. And he does it really well. He's got a lot of nice little details to his game to set up his passes to dominant positions. He's a really explosive athlete and has both like really tight entries to submissions and then like has some like jaw-dropping dynamic entries. And for Dawodu, mat work has been his Achilles heel a little bit. And the fact that he survived on the mat last time with Magomedov was probably a confidence booster for him, and it should be I'm really looking forward to this fight because it's gonna be fun.
Yeah, I kind of wish they weren't making it again though, because I feel like it's like, okay, you put Dawodu through this wood chipper, and he barely survived. Like he got the draw.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's let him keep building a little before you're just like, okay, back into the wood chipper.
Yeah.
Like, this is going to be a tough one for him. He's a dude that really, I want to see this prospect coddled a little because, frankly, he could be a really great top-level fighter if he can keep on the winning track and stay in MMA. Basically, like, I just want this guy to be convinced to, like, keep fighting in this sport and keep moving forward. He started in 2014, and he's just got an amazing skill base.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping that this...
he's not a champion, so it's not like they need to make a rematch for a draw. You can just move on from it. And it's one of the things that, like, MMA does this, I feel like, more than boxing does. When, like, there's a draw, it's like, no, we got to run it back. We have to have someone win this fight. Where it's like,
yeah,
especially at this point in the guy's career, just it's a draw. Move on and fight somebody else. But, I mean, he's looked so fantastic in his fights leading up to that it is stylistically problematic for him. But if he can overcome this, then Dawodu is moving forward with it, because I think Magomedov, in his own right,
if he can overcome this, then the UFC needs to figure out a way to get him out of World Series of Fighting, because he might as well just be in the division moving up as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and Magomedov also is probably going to end up being a pretty damn good featherweight.
Yeah. Lastly on this card, a guy we still have to talk about, despite the fact that he's already held the belt for World Series of Fighting, is Lance Palmer.
Oh yeah, Lance Palmer's getting in there.
He's rematching his loss to Alejandro de Almeida at World Series of Fighting 26. So this is another immediate rematch off a loss, a rematch that makes more sense to me under those circumstances for one of the better young Team Alpha male fighters. I'm 29, but only fighting since 2011.
Yep. It's well, Palmer was kind of one of those physical beast who had a very specific game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we were both talking about, we wanted to see what happened when he got taken outside his game. And I mean, he had kind of a Darian Caldwell like loss on his record already, like falling into a guillotine. But other than that, we wanted to see him in a fight that kind of took him out of his, like, basically his, like, top position domination game.
Yeah.
And when that happened, when he got taken out of his game, he didn't adapt very well. And I agree, it makes more sense running back.
I kind of feel a little bad. I kind of feel a little bad.
Oh, man.
Palmer, I want to say, sort of like basic building blocks of the Team Alpha male style of this, like, powerful wrestle grappling to start out with, where you've got a very, the Team Alpha male wrestling style is very rinse and repeat. Hit the power takedown, get the submission. If you don't, reset. Hit the power takedown, get the submission. If you don't, reset. And he's got a bunch of submission wins. He's been working on that game over time. But it feels like he's coming up at just a time when Team Alpha Male was kind of falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, is he going to get the, like, deep technical striking game that a lot of the other Team Alpha Male fighters who developed in the few years before him got the benefit of? Or is he now just going to get this new breed Team Alpha Male game where we are, their striking is kind of back to basics. Guys are having to go to other places to find that. And I think he's done some traveling too because of that. He's started doing a little moving around. But he's still with the team, and it makes me wonder if we're going to see him permanently kind of capped in a gym and in a style that is not developing fighters the way it used to.
Yeah. No, I think it is. He'll be kind of an interesting case study in seeing what a young Team Alpha male fighter looks like at this point, and how their development goes, because that camp has been through a lot in the last couple of years. Reportedly, it almost came apart. It came very close to kind of falling apart, and so they've kind of put it back together. But I agree that he's going to be an interesting one to follow, just to see what young Team Alpha male fighters what we can kind of expect from them moving forward.
Yeah, because he's right in the middle of the developmental point of his career where we are expecting to see big, consistent leap. We're expecting to see his game start to click over the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, how is that going to click? What's gonna move ahead and jump forward for him? Because he's an elite athlete, he's a great wrestler, and he's got a submission game to go with it. The parts are there for him to be a very good high-level fighter as he continues. But we've already seen him hit a first decision loss wall where it's like, this is a guy you just lost to, flat out. No getting subbed, no getting knocked out, none of that. You just came in and you lost to this dude. So how do you get past that? Because to date, at least, Alejandro de Almeida has not represented the highest level of featherweight contenders.
Yeah.
Maybe he's developing too, and he's sneaking up as this next elite great fighter that everybody just kind of missed out on, but that hasn't been the case to date. So
yeah,
it's definitely an interesting point for Palmer to see if he can come back after that fight and come in with something new. That brings us over to Invicta FC 18, which obviously Invicta is always going to be some kind of a prospect-loaded affair.
Mm-hmm.
Because the nature of women's MMA is that almost all of these women are coming in with very little experience, very little time in the sport, major developments from fight to fight. But there are a couple of people that really stick out on this card. The first and foremost is the headliner, Alexa Grasso. She's the main highlight attraction of this card for young talent.
Yeah, Alexa's a very, very strong boxer. Both offensively and defensively. She's very, very savvy defensively. Excellent footwork, good use of angles and pivots, and then on top of that, very sharp head movement. And then she puts really nice hands on opponents. And then on top of that, she's a pretty good grappler. She's not outstanding. It's not like a real offensive tool for her, but it's definitely good enough for her to get by and for her to funnel her game back to her striking.
She's the kind of grappler that when she hits the mat, she's immediately jumping on something aggressive to use in order to get your opponent off of her. Yep. Like maybe she might get a submission out of it, but otherwise she'll threaten with an armbar or a triangle or something like that. And the moment that her opponent pulls out, she's right back up to her feet.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, that technical, like she's just a really good, clean, technical kickboxer on a level that we rarely see in women's MMA, like, more than Kowalkiewicz, more than Inoue, who she beat. You're getting up into that sort of the closer to the Joannas and the Shevchenkos and the other really good high-level strikers in the sport, in that she just, the defense is there just as much as the offense is there. Mm-hmm. It's not like Kowalkiewicz, who's got fast hands, who throws good combinations, but is just kind of a defensive liability at times. Grasso is a really good, complete striker. So,
yeah,
I'm at least she is at range. In the clinch, she still needs work, but I'm interested in this fight with Jodie Esquibel because Esquibel's a great prospect in her own right too. A little like powerhouse kind of wrestler fighter.
Yeah.
But
and like a very quintessential Jackson Wink striker.
Yeah, very quintessential Jackson Wink striker. I'm also interested too that like she hasn't fought in a couple years, so we really don't know what she's gonna look like in this fight.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a theme for this. There are some other fighters on this card that I'm kind of interested in. Sort of like Agnes. Let's see, Niedźwiedź, I believe is how that's pronounced.
Yeah,
Agnieszka Niedźwiedź, and Tessa Simpson. Both look like interesting prospects. They could be very good, but neither of them has fought for like 2 solid years now. So we really don't know what we're going to get out of these fighters long term. Like they're just kind of dropping in on an MMA career. Or Tessa Simpson had 1 fight in 2016, but before that hadn't fought since 2013, rather. So, it's there's some fighters on this card I'm interested in. The other big name prospect I'm very interested in, who's been working consistently, is Aspen Ladd off this card.
Yeah, Aspen Ladd's an interesting one. She's still really young. She's only 21 at this point. Only has 3 fights in her pro career, but all of them have been fairly impressive, and she's looked really solid in them. She started off as like a really raw 19-year-old, and has been growing from there.
She reminds me a lot of Paige Van Zandt. Like, if there's a comparison I would make to that kind of, it's like the same kind of thing where you expect, top women's MMA prospect, she must be this really flashy sort of Michelle Watterson type athlete, lots of exciting grappling and big kicks and tight boxing or stuff like that. Whereas Ladd's not bad. She's a decent striker and all that, but mostly she's just kind of a physical bully.
Yeah.
Just a powerful bully who will push you up against the cage, take you down, and just positionally dominate you and bully you. And I mean, that's a kind of power game that could take her a long way, a lot more than necessarily some of the flashier games we see out there, because, there are a lot of women who aren't going to have that kind of physical presence in the cage.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested to see her fight too. Obviously, Mizuki Inoue is on this card too. Megan Anderson. There are some other good prospects. Christine Stanley. But I'm really interested in Grasso and Ladd. They're the two that really stand out to me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's not a lot of big name prospects fighting around the world. Almost no European or Russian cards at all, which tends to cut way down on our international prospects. There's an RFA card,
which has some people, but not really.
Yeah, nothing that stands out massively. There are a couple of deep Brazilian cards, which could provide something interesting. Jungle Fight and Shudo Brazil both have cards. There's, Herbeth Sousa, Bianca Damioni, and Rodrigo Praia, who are all good athletes who are very confident, like wild, powerful fighters.
Yeah.
A guy I'm really actually interested in, who I think could be a very high level prospect, is Anderson Buzica, who's on that Jungle Fight card. He's a really powerful Muay Thai striker with a nicely deep technical base as a Muay Thai striker.
Yep, and a good counter wrestler too, at least for the Brazilian scene. And crazy aggressive.
Crazy aggressive, really powerful, really like a huge, I think he's a bantamweight and he's like 6 feet tall. So I don't know how that'll end up working for him as he goes on in his career. But he's a dude that might be closer to that blue chip kind of guy I'm looking out for, as like somebody that could make a big impact if he keeps improving. Shudo has Daniel Virginio and Klinger Pinheiro. Both guys look like they could be decent. Luciano Benicio. So there's a few fighters out there on the Brazilian circuit, that Jungle Fight and Shudo card, to look out for. Look for some good performances. Otherwise, nothing else really going on. Nothing really stands out. There's a list at the end of the video. But unless you have anything to cover, I think that should wrap us up.
Nope.
All right. Well, on that note, you can find me on Twitter at TheZaneSimon. You can find Tom on Twitter at TP_Grant. You can find both of us over at Bloody Elbow from time to time. Me most of the time. And
I'm currently working on a piece for Bloody Elbow and working on a piece for Flow Grappling. Hopefully both of them will be out in the next few weeks.
Great. We'll look forward to that. Absolutely. I'll be coming back with a Invicta vivisection today and a UFC 201 vivisection tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it over on YouTube. Subscribe to MMANation.com. It's DOTCOM, our YouTube channel, where you get all the latest Bloody Elbow shows, interviews, videos, all that good stuff. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.